A drop shot is truly one of the best techniques that all bass anglers should know. And in today's video, I want to give you 5 tips that will help you to start catching a lot more fish with a drop shot. So let's dive on in. Tip number 1 when it comes to fishing a drop shot is do not overcomplicate your plastic choice. There are a ton of different plastics out there on the market. Some that are actually designed to be fish on the drop shot technique, and others that are just plastics that people put on the drop shot. And the thing is that all of them work at times. Let's just be 100% real. There are days out there when you go out fishing where all of these plastics are going to work and you can catch fish on a number of them. But the thing that I think happens with a lot of anglers, especially newer anglers, is that they just get a little bit overwhelmed by all the different lures and techniques that we have in bass fishing. Not only that, but then you look at a technique like the drop shot and you have 15 different professional anglers that are all telling you to fish a different drop shot plastic. So if you are new to fishing, it might be a little bit overwhelming. So to me, one thing that I have found is that no matter if you're fishing for largemouth, smallmouth, or spotted bass, a smaller straight-tailed worm will almost always work, no matter where you go in the country. So yeah, sometimes when you go up north, having a bait that looks a little bit more like a goby is going to help you to get some bites. But I have caught fish, for example, on Lake Oneida and the St. Lawrence River that have a lot of goby in them on your typical straight-tailed worm. Now, my favorite straight-tailed worm that I've used a lot is your standard robo worm. Now, for me, I really like the 4.5 inch model when I'm fishing for spotted bass and smallmouth, and when I'm fishing for largemouth, I like that fatter 6-inch model. In my opinion, you can take this exact robo worm and fish it anywhere in the country and you're going to catch fish. Now, to me, I really like to keep colors fairly simple. I'm gonna have something that's fairly natural colored, something like a green, or for instance, in the robo worm, an Aaron's Magic color is something that I really like. Now, another color that I like that just seems to work is called Margarita Mutilator. It's like a purple color. I really use it a lot when I'm fishing in muddier water or in darker situations because it is a darker colored worm, which just helps the bass to see it a little bit in that dark water. The only other color that I really like to use is something that is a little bit more bait fish in color. There's a lot of them out there on the market, but something that looks a little bit more like a minnow. If I know that the fish are feeding on shad or minnows or bait fish, I might pick up that worm. But if you don't know what color, or you only want one color to get, grab you some Aaron's Magic. That's gonna work anywhere in the country in any water conditions. Now, tip number 2 when it comes to fishing the drop shot is do not overwork your bait. Again, this is something that I see a lot of not only beginners do, but even guys who have been fishing for a long time. If you have not picked up a drop shot, I think the temptation when you pick that bait up is to really just sit there and jiggle it, right? Because a drop shot, you have the weight below your worm, so you want that bait to be moving. But what I have found is that the best retrieve with a drop shot, and I'm not talking about fishing a drop shot vertically, where I see a fish, for example, on my graph and I drop straight down to him. I'm talking about fishing this in ponds, in lakes, where I am casting the drop shot. The best technique that I have found is simply dragging a drop shot across the bottom. Your weight is going to remain on the bottom and your plastic is going to be kind of fixed, you know, 1 foot, 2 foot above the bottom, and simply dragging that across the bottom through cover like grass or rock or wood, dragging it, slowly dragging it, gets me more bites than just about any other technique. And I really saw this firsthand over 10 years ago when I was fishing with 2 of my friends, and we were both in the boat and they were both working that worm pretty aggressively, like you might think that you're supposed to, and I was simply dragging that bait very slowly. And during that day, I caught I think 5 or 6 keeper fish and one that was a 6-pounder, and both of my buddies only caught 1 fish a piece. And I really believed it was because they were overworking that bait. This is a finesse technique So if the bass are gonna bite something that is aggressively moving, you might as well fish something like a Texas rig that is a bigger presence. You can get away with bigger line on it. So remember, this is a finesse technique. Work it in a finesse manner, and for me, the best way is to cast it out and drag it across the bottom. Now, tip number 3 is don't forget about the drop shot when you're fishing that off color or muddy water. I think for a lot of anglers, when they think about a drop shot, you always hear about them associating it with clear water, or even one step further, only associating it with smallmouth bass. And although it works well in clear water and works well with smallmouth, I have found that, especially in highly pressured situations, fishing a drop shot in dirty water can catch you bass that will not bite anything else. Here, even locally, I have fished a drop shot in a dirty water pond that sees a lot of pressure, and have been able to go behind guys that are fishing your typical Texas rigs or jigs or spinner baits and catch fish behind them with a drop shot. It is still a very effective technique in that dirty water. Now, the big thing that I think is important to know about in dirty water is I do like to step up my line size. A lot of times when I'm fishing a drop shot in clear water, I use 8-pound tests. Sometimes I'll go down to 6, but for the most part, it's 8-pound tests. Now, if I'm fishing in dirty water, I don't mind using 10-pound or even 12-pound fluorocarbon, because I can get away with a little bit heavier line in that off-color water. Now, another thing when it comes to drop shotting is you can actually go with really big line in a bait cast rod. You can actually use a bait cast rod on what we call a bubba shot. Basically, a bubba shot is a drop shot on heavy line. That's all it really is. This is something that you see a lot of guys do out in the West, but it's made its way over here to the eastern part of the United States, and you can flip and pitch with 20-pound fluorocarbon a small drop shot and catch a lot of fish. So don't forget about using a drop shot in muddy water. It can still get you a lot of bites when it's hard to get bit. Tip number 4 when it comes to fishing a drop shot is play with your leader length. And when I'm talking about leader in this situation, what I'm referring to is the amount of line between the weight, which is at the bottom of this rig, and your soft plastic. Now, most of the time that I go out fishing, I will make a drop shot that's typically has a leader length of about 12 to 18 inches. I would say that that is my standard drop shot. I can go out there and get bit with that a lot. But there are times throughout the year, especially later in the year, like when you're getting into late August and September, what you see a lot in fisheries is that the bass will start to suspend off the bottoms, especially in clear water situations. You will have bass that will suspend off the bottom 2 foot, 3 foot. And although it doesn't sound like a lot, sometimes bass do not like to go down to get a bait. They would rather go up to get a bait. So during late summer, a lot of times I like to go with a very long drop shot leader. I mean, sometimes 3 foot in length, which is a little bit cumbersome to be able to cast, but I have seen that make a bigger difference than trying to find that perfect soft plastic. A lot of times I'm still going to use the exact same plastic, but I'm simply going to use a longer leader length, and that helps me to get bit, especially, like I said, during late summer. Now, on the flip side of things, during that pre-spawn time of the year, I feel like a lot of fish will really relate closely and hang tightly to the bottom. So during the pre-spawn, sometimes I use really small leaders. I'm talking leaders that are about 6 inches, very, very small, keeping that bait just slightly off the bottom. So that's the one thing that I would say that you should mess with more, especially more than your soft plastics that you're using, is leader length. Tip number 5 when it comes to fishing a drop shot is use the lightest weight on your drop shot that you can get away with. I have seen that using a very light weight on your drop shot does 2 main things that helps you to get more bites. Now, the first thing that it's going to do, it simply makes your soft plastic look way more natural out there on the bottom. Even when you're dragging it across, just the bottom, it makes your plastic look, I mean, I'm telling you, way more natural. Just look at your bait in the water. Rig up a drop shot with a 1/2 ounce weight on it, and rig up a drop shot with a 1/4 ounce weight, and drag them across the bottom in really shallow water. You will see how much more natural that bait on the 1/4 ounce weight looks in comparison to the 1/2 ounce, which is just a lot of weight to drag behind. Now, if you're fishing a drop shot vertically for maybe smallmouth or even really deep largemouth and spots where you're dropping down 40 feet vertically, in those situations, yeah, it might be better to use a 1/2 ounce, even a 3/4 ounce weight, just to get that bait down really, really quickly. But if you can, when you're fishing this technique, I highly suggest trying to fish the lightest weight that you can. I have seen this be a really big difference on the number of bites that you get. I was fishing a tournament on Lake Champlain a number of years ago, and the second day of this tournament, I had caught over 17 pounds the first day of smallmouth, all on a drop shot. The second day, things got really, really tough. The water and the wind completely just died. It was dead calm out there, and I switched over from a 3/8 ounce weight, which I'd used the day before and caught a ton of fish on, to a 1/4 ounce weight, just because I wanted that bait to look more naturally, and it instantly made a big difference. I instantly started catching more fish simply because I changed the weight, and it made that bait look more natural. The other big thing that using a light weight will help you with is simply not getting snagged, especially if you're fishing around a lot of rock cover, which personally, when I fish drop shot, a lot of times I'm fishing it on a harder bottom, a rock bottom, and using that light weight, you'll get snagged way less than using a heavier weight. So when you can, get away with the lightest weight possible. I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please don't forget to subscribe, comment below, and I will see you guys the next time on Sportsman's Outfitters.